Have you ever been hit with the feeling where time just stops while making the most difficult decision of your life? I have. It was the most pressuring, stressful, and scariest decision that I ever made, but I somehow managed with the right choice. It was a very narrow escape. First thing first, I'm a prison security officer working at a very dark but highly facilitated prison in Detroit. I would have to say half of hell's spawn dwells here. The worst criminals you could ever imagine all decided to converge into one place. That place so happens to be here. And let me tell you, this place is the most messed up grime hole you could ever imagine. Think of a place with no rules, inhabited by unruly citizens. This is it. It turns you into a person you never thought you'd be. Your mind becomes easily desensitized and corrupt over the course of a month or so. The least cringeworthy crime somebody committed here was probably an aggravated assault on multiple accounts. Oftentimes, me and other guards would try to find somebody who had the lightest charge or charges on them when we got bored. And if there were no child molesters to beat the shit out of for fun. Prison fights are a daily basis. Riots used to be monthly rituals, and many of us used to wonder how the hell we survived this long before we upgraded. It became so uptight. We were authorized to fire upon anybody who causes misconduct, and try everything to keep things in order before we have to fire a shot. It really messes with your head, and makes you forget proper ethics and reason. I've seen guards just shoot prisoners just because they didn't like them. The cells get darker and colder the deeper you get into the facility. Some of them make you wonder if they're even supposed to be an entire cell. We sometimes travel there since the prison fills up pretty quickly, while the older one takes leave. The deepest hall had an ambiance of dreadful darkness. The occasional rat squeal could be heard. The stereotypical moisture-dropping sounds were present. You could sometimes hear the prisoners screaming and pitching a fit while losing their sanity. Just the feeling of the hall gave you the creeps. It was cold, and able to send chills down your body no matter how many times you've been down there. There was, however, one strange room that we noticed at the end of one of the halls. It was found in the deep depths of the cell block. It seemed to have an old steel bar for a handle. It had 4 strange-looking locks. There was a very faded square of what used to be a sign. I never knew what it once said, and neither did the other guides. The only letters that I could make out were OOR at the bottom right-hand corner. Nobody that we knew had ever been through those doors, except the very highest-ranking officials. Some of us had questioned the door. They were all told the same thing. It's classified. A rumor leaked that dead bodies made into a tomb were settled there, but it wasn't solid enough for most of us to believe in. We all just knew that something wasn't right about that room. Today, a major prison riot broke out. Who knows what started it? It all seemed so planned out, so cleverly timed. 3 guards were killed instantly with a giant mob of orange suits attacking everybody else inside. Some had small, almost useless weapons, which escalated into bigger and much more dangerous weapons. The guards' batons were taken and used to bash doors in their heads. A few of them somehow salvaged some firearms and were using them against us. The guards in the most populated rooms had no chance. There were many groups wandering around, either trying to let out other prisoners or find the emergency gun cache. It was hidden very well in the facility, but it wouldn't go undiscovered for long. It could eventually be found, especially with the determination of some prisoners. I ran into one of the top-secret rooms, which was open but deserted. I reached into an open drawer hidden under a desk in the corner of the room. There was a key. It wasn't like any key I'd ever seen. It was shaped like a skeleton key, except the studs were shaped in strange thunderbolt-like patterns. There was nothing nice to it. It said, "Warning. Authorized use only for this key or lethal force will be used." I somehow instantly knew what it was for, so I ran towards the depths of the jail while dodging incoming prisoner blows. I managed to throw a deadly nosebreak to one of them, and I slammed another. I don't remember how I got there. I must have blacked out from the fight. As I stood at the end of the long cell hall, I quivered, probably from the coldness of the cell and the slight fear that was bothering me. The dripping of moisture must have been the loudest sound I'd ever heard at the time. I felt lightheaded, wondering what I was about to experience. However, I did not have much time. Whether I was going to hide into the room or bunker in for safety, I needed to get in, so I placed the key into the locks. It required effort to awkwardly twist the key. Each one had a loud breaking sound when they were unlocked. I paused. I felt very uncomfortable. I knew it had to be done. I grabbed the metal handle and I pulled. It didn't budge. It required a lot more effort to be opened. It scraped against the ground and slowly creaked its way open, steel grinding against the tough floor. It produced an eerie, echoing creaking sound. I went inside and closed the door until there was only a crack. It was dark, pitch dark, even though I could barely see the crack from the door. All that I saw was black. The room seemed to be spacey enough to spread out your arms without touching the walls. I felt for a switch, a lever, something, anything to produce even just a little light. I felt a string that seemed to be attached to something above me. I pulled on it. An old-fashioned metal hanging light shone from above, and there in front of me was a steel cylinder. It was not only locked with a safe wheel and 4 other strange-looking locks, but it was bolted shut, like it was never meant to be opened. Then the answer to all my curiosity to what was in the room came upon me when I saw a metal peephole. It was locked closed. It was placed about 3 feet above my head. I'm 6'1", and the cylinder towered over me. My height only reached half out of the cylinder. I found a key laying out on a sealed drawer nearby that I didn't notice due to the dark display I'd been fantasizing about for the longest time. I placed the key into the peephole to see if it would work. To my surprise, it fit perfectly in the lock. I took it off and took a deep breath. This is it. No turning back now. I slowly slid the peephole open. I felt like I couldn't move any part of my body besides my hands. Immediately, I saw 2 dim, scarred eyelids inside. Both eyes were not only scarred, but had a clear, previously cut gash down the middle. I froze for a second, but then after a bit I said, "Hello?" The eyes opened swiftly without warning. These eyes were unlike anything I'd ever seen. One was discolored and white as if it were a blind eye. The other was red, blood red. He responded with a very deep voice that came from his belly.
"Yes,"
said a very deep, booming, raspy voice full of despair and hate. The air filled with the sound of his speech. "Hello," I stuttered. I was too scared to even move. Not only the eyes were scarring to look at, but the feeling of dread was upon me.
"You awaked me for what reason?"
He sounded quite angry. I honestly don't know. The prisoners, they all just revolted. They overpowered us, and this was the only place that I could go.
"The inevitable deaths have come upon you. You only have one choice."
The power and creepy feeling of his voice was enough to make you tremble in fear. No amounts of steel could protect you from this type of fear. "Who are you?"
"The Punisher,"
was all he said. "Why do they keep you locked up in this chamber, if I must ask?"
"Behind you."
At this point, I was shocked and scared shitless. I was certain that there was actually someone behind me ready to kill me with their bare hands. I turned and there was a metal cabinet nearby. I walked over to it, noticing that my feet were shaking, and I opened it. Inside were many files.
"Open,"
said prisoner, the Punisher. The bellow of his voice startled me. I opened one file named Crime Scene Photos. Instantly, I was disgusted and I grew sick to my stomach. One of the pages read, 12 victims in squatter home cellar. Next to it was a picture of bodies impaled through the mouth and out through the throat. They were upside down, stripped, bloodied, and bearing almost no layers of skin. Their mouths were stretched wide open and their jaws unhinged so that the poles which impaled them could fit. Some of them had absolutely no teeth but bloody gums squeezing on the poles. Their eyes were rolled back into their head, and some of them were facing directly at the camera. The bloodshot whites of their eyes displayed the pain and agony they must have gone through. Behind them, there was a message written in blood on the southern concrete wall, reading, "Penance." I have never seen such a revolting picture in my life. "You did all of this." I trembled.
"They deserved it,"
quietly replied the prisoner. I looked deeper and it showed a picture of a cell from the prison. There was so much gore in the cells. I remember overhearing about this incident from prisoners, but I didn't know if it was actually true. There lay 2 of what seemed like dead inmates on the ground, and one was nailed to the wall with a long metal piece from the bed. They were so terribly mangled that they couldn't have been recognized as human. God, this actually happened. "It's true,"
"Yes,"
quietly said the voice. I looked at the other files, attempting to look for information on this sick person. I read that his real name was unknown, but his famous alias was the Punisher. His guessed age was 30. He was a massive hulk and 7 feet tall, weighing around 300 pounds. I couldn't believe it. Taking on someone of this magnitude was impossible without enough firepower. His early life is completely unknown. He has 103 confirmed murders, although he potentially has claimed 170. Skipping along his biography, He apparently has killed many known criminals. He had killed 2 cops. He was caught in the act of filleting a fully conscious man alive after people heard the overwhelming screams from nearby. It took 6 tasers to take him down. He survived 2 shotgun shells to the side and stomach. All the victims and crimes were kept confidential to keep the public from fearing the streets. Now I can see why this man, or this thing, is kept in a secret room with a very secure chamber. Why would you do this? I asked in disbelief.
They deserve to die. They deserve to suffer. They deserve to rot,
he said. Why did they deserve to die? I was on the verge of insanity from what I had seen.
They inflicted others with pain. They must suffer penance.
I had to think fast. The prisoners are closing in fast. There's no chance of hiding back here for long. There are still rioting prisoners here. My gun won't protect me against all of them. My hand-to-hand skills are good, but I can't go on forever. I had myself cornered. Here and there, I can very faintly hear a gunshot fired outside. The last possible choice I could have is to release the prisoner. I could only hope that he killed only those who deserved it, though not in the methods that he did it. If he would help me, it could be my only chance to get out alive. Will you help me?
No. I will help the ones who can be victimized by these heaps of meat.
Does that include me? I was praying at this point for a miracle.
Yes.
I quickly grabbed a strange-looking tool from the cabinet. It seemed like it would take out the bolts from the door. I took out the bolts and they clanged on the floor. I then carefully unlocked the locks one by one, very slowly but carefully, hearing nothing but the sound of the key jingling the pins. And then came the final step, the safe wheel. It looked very threatening and uninviting, but I had no choice. I turned it multiple times, using all my might, thinking it would never open. And suddenly, a very loud piercing clang noise echoed throughout the room. It scared me and made me fall back. I watched as the door slowly opened, producing a loud creaking. Inside, there the prisoner stood, just as his file described. He was a giant, wearing ragged old orange clothes greased up to the point where it was almost gray. He was a mess. His face was terribly scarred. Not a single patch of his skin on his face was smooth. His malicious eyes stared back at me, one of them white and one of them red. They stared at me from behind a mask, which covered his mouth and nose. It had straps that wrapped around the back of his head, and it seemed to have parts that went into his mouth. Instantly, I referenced it to Hannibal Lecter. The mask was probably to keep him from biting. His scars left you speechless with fear. He had very long black hair which lengthened down to his waist, and there were chains around his limbs. The inside of the steel door had a couple of dents, and they were made for a human being. I thought to myself how I would unchain him without freaking the hell out. But just then, he fucking broke the chains right out of the chamber. Just like that. A human being ripping the chains from the chamber of ease. He stepped out, his boots producing a loud thump that could feel on the ground. He towered over my head. He came up to me, staring me in the eyes, into my soul and past it. He was extremely enraged. I felt so frightened that I couldn't move. I was shivering throughout my whole body. I wouldn't dare budge or twitch. He put his hands forward. I thought he was going to wring my neck, but he didn't. He was showing his handcuffs so that I could unlock them. I did so for him, and then slowly sidestepped out of the way. He just kept staring at me with a look as if he wanted nothing more than to gouge my eyes out. But he slowly turned and went on his way. He opened the door with almost no effort and thumped down the cell block hall. I watched him as he made his way down. All of a sudden, 2 prisoners arrived around the corner and darted down the block. That proved to be the biggest mistake of their entire lives. Immediately they saw the Punisher and they just froze, but worse than I ever did. They must have known about the incident in the cell. They were too shocked to budge. Their eyes widened. Unexpectedly, the giant drew back his hand and backhanded his fist into the side of the first prisoner's head. His head smacked off the door of one of the hole cells and drew blood all over his face. He grabbed the second prisoner's face and smashed the back of his head against the other side where the wall was. Instantly, brain matter and blood and pieces of skull blotched everywhere, making a gory mess on the wall and floor. I was speechless. I couldn't say or do anything from this point. He had killed 2 men with little effort. By the time that I had collected myself and regained what was left of my sanity, a few minutes later, I started down the hall towards the direction that the Punisher went. It wasn't long before the commotion in the prison went from angry rhymes to blood-curdling screams, cries for help, pleas for mercy, and groans of agony. I saw the remains of prisoners scattered all around. As the halls and rooms grew smaller, all I could see were bloodied fragments covering orange clothing. Some were impaled on bars in the same fashion as before, which were made from a ripped-off cell door. Gunshots fired, but it seemed to do nothing about the screams. I ran towards the path of dismembered limbs. Not a single life was spared. No quarter, no warning, no mercy. Every prisoner was grotesquely murdered in cold blood. One of them was hung over the railing by an orange pair of pants. The only bodies that weren't mangled as badly as the orange suits were the guards. Most of the corpses were still intact. The ones that were still alive were still scared shitless. Maybe they were saved. When I had caught up to the Punisher, I could see him stop on a prisoner's head, squashing it like a grape. He was pulling a prisoner off a guard by his neck. He picked him up and slammed him against the wall and squeezed until his neck made a loud cracking sound. He was killed instantly. Another inmate attempted to rush at him with the butt of a shotgun. He ran it into his back, but it barely even budged him. And in response, the Punisher turned around and grabbed the gun. The inmate tried to punch him in the face, but he blocked it with his right hand, grabbing it, and struck the elbow with his left hand, dislocating it. The inmate screamed in pain. The Punisher then proceeded to bludgeon him to a shattered boneless pulp with a shotgun until it broke apart. He then shoved the barrel into the inmate's abdomen. A hiding prisoner attempted to grab me from behind. I turned, elbowing him in the head twice, and I bent over to grab his right leg. I rolled forward and pulled back as hard as I could, dislocating his limb. There was no chance of him getting up. However, the Punisher didn't think the same thing. He grabbed the prisoner's intact left leg, straightened it, and crunched it into his body. The prisoner screamed in pain and agony from the shock. The Punisher walked on like it never happened. Me and the other guards were able to get situated as we could once the SWAT had arrived. However, once they had made it, the Punisher was long gone. The Punisher has never been heard of ever since. He had disappeared without a trace. He left no signs of leave after the bloodbath of the jail. Investigators and authorities have searched up and down the city, inside and out. Eyes were kept open for more gruesome reports, but they found nothing. I can honestly see why they have sought him tirelessly. He could be anywhere, doing anything, to anybody.